This is R2D Tech, and today I thought we'd have a look at quite a cool budget smartphone, the Realme 7 5G, so stay tuned. Normally when I talk about a smartphone, I'll end the video with the price, but since this entire phone is based off the budget idea, I thought this time I'd change things up a little and start with the price. So on their official website, they list it for around £279, which is already a great deal for what you're getting, and we'll get into that in just a bit. But if you go onto Amazon, you can actually find it for £229, which just blows my mind. I mean, like... Of course though, any phone at this price point will have to make a few sacrifices when it comes to build quality. So the back is a really nice gradient finish, but it is plastic, so slightly less durable, and the frame is also plastic as well. So that does mean that it might be slightly less durable than another phone with, say, an aluminium frame and glass back. But unless you're bending this or like sitting on it or anything like that, it should be fine, to be honest. The display is 6.5 inches, which I think, yes, is quite large, but also that means that it'll be really nice for viewing content or gaming. And you have got a punch hole camera in the top left-hand corner, which I think is the best implementation at the moment anyway in terms of aesthetics. It's a 1080p resolution. Now that's perfectly acceptable, especially on a budget phone or any phone for that matter. And it's 120Hz refresh rate, which is absolutely amazing. Like, that's very rare on a budget smartphone. I think this might be the first smartphone under £300 to have a 120Hz display that I've seen anyway. So that's really cool. It will just make your software experience really smooth, and anything like gaming as well will just seem much smoother as well. The only downside to this display that I can see is that it's an LCD panel, which means you won't get true blacks or the best contrast like you would on an OLED panel, but it's still going to be really good anyway, to be honest. In terms of software, you're getting Android 10 straight out the box, so not Android 11 unfortunately, but hopefully they'll update this quite quickly. Now the skin over the top is Realme UI 1.0, which is quite similar to ColorOS actually, and I personally like it a lot. They have some really cool one-handed use features, like you can drag whatever your page you're on to the bottom left corner so you can access things easier. Or you can even pull all your apps to the bottom left corner on your home page so you can click them without having to reach all the way to the top. I think features like this are just really nice, and stock Android should have them, to be honest. But this software isn't too far off stock Android, and you can always customize things like icons to make it appear more like stock Android. Of course, this is still quite divisive, and you do need to try it for yourself to see if you like it, but personally, I think it's quite a nice software. The chipset in this device is quite unusual for the UK, because you're getting a MediaTek Dimensity 800U 5G chipset, which is quite a mouthful, but it is still going to be quite decent in terms of performance. In terms of benchmarks, it should be quite similar to the Snapdragon 720G chipset. It would have been preferable.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really.
It would have been preferable if it was more similar to the Snapdragon 765 or even 865 chipset in terms of benchmarks, but to be honest, you can't really expect that much at a price of £229, and for what you're paying, I think it's still going to perform very well. And for the everyday person, it should be able to run almost anything that you want, including some games. Now, in terms of storage, there's only one option, which is 128GB. This is quite generous for a budget smartphone, especially since there's only one model. And then in terms of RAM, you can choose between 6 or 8GB of RAM. Of course, I would recommend going with the 8GB of RAM just so it's more future-proof, but if you're the sort of person that upgrades your phone every year, then it might not matter that much to you. Moving on to the main camera unit on the back, it is a quad camera setup, which is quite generous actually for a budget smartphone, and you're getting a 48 megapixel main lens, which is quite impressive actually. You'll be able to get lots of detail with this. Of course, the software processing might not be the very best compared to Google's phones, for example, but for a budget smartphone, it's still quite impressive. When you do shoot though in the standard mode, it will be in 12 megapixels since it does bin it down, but you can switch to the 48 megapixel mode if you want. Now, the secondary lens is an 8 megapixel ultra wide, which I think is very useful. No, you're not getting a telephoto lens, but the ultra wide is definitely more useful in my opinion. Then you're getting a 2 megapixel macro lens, which I personally think is quite useful, and correction, I think it's quite useless. I definitely would have rather seen a telephoto instead of this, but I think it's just a cheap way of them throwing in an extra camera and being able to say that they have a quad camera set up. I'm not going to be too disappointed about that since it is still a very cheap smartphone and some people might use this, but to be honest, I don't expect the image quality from this camera to be anything special. And the last lens is just a depth sensor, so nothing special, but it will help with things like portrait mode, which is quite nice to see on a budget smartphone. The selfie camera is 16 megapixels, nothing like 48 megapixels of course, but this is actually still very good for a selfie camera on a budget smartphone. We've definitely seen like 8 megapixel ones on other phones, so I'm quite happy with this and I expect the images to be decent, not the best, but still very good for the price. Now since we're on the topic of cameras, let's discuss video a bit. I think this is becoming more and more important on smartphones for the average user, especially me since I make YouTube videos and take a lot of video when I'm outside as well, but I think most people are with me on this anyway. So the main camera can shoot up to 4K 30 frames per second, not 60 and definitely not 8K either, but it's still pretty decent for the price you're paying, and most YouTube videos, for example, are shot in either 24 or 30 frames per second anyway, so you don't really need the 60. It would have been nice to see, but definitely not expected at this price point. And on the front selfie camera, you can only shoot up to 1080p 30 frames per second, which yes, is very disappointing to me at least, but I'm definitely not expecting anything more at the price point. Let's put it like this, I don't think anyone buying this phone will be looking for the best cameras out there. If that was the case, they'd probably go with a Pixel phone like the Pixel 4a, which is the budget version of the Pixel, but you will still get some pretty decent images and video out of this camera anyway. One area where this phone really seems to shine is battery, because they have actually put a 5000 milliamp hour battery in this device. Now, I think that's absolutely great, especially for a budget phone, and I'm really impressed with this actually, since there's some flagship phones out there which cost more than double the price and haven't managed to put in such a large battery. This is definitely really cool and definitely very welcomed on my half at least. But the charging is also really impressive. They give you a 30-watt charger in the box, unlike some companies out there who don't give you a power brick in the box anymore. I think we all know who that is. But you'll definitely get full day battery life, if not more, and you can charge it quite quickly with the included power brick, so that's very nice. On the topic of I/O or input output, you're getting a headphone jack, which is very generous of them indeed in 2020. You're also getting USB-C, which is to be expected, I guess, on an Android phone nowadays. And you're getting expandable storage, so you can have a micro SD card slot or micro SD card in there if you have one SIM, but you're also getting dual SIM, but the only way you can use it is if you don't have the micro SD card in there. So to put it more clearly, you can have one micro SD card and one SIM, or you can have two SIM cards and no micro SD. I would probably use the expandable storage to be honest, but if you don't want to, if you want to use the dual SIM, you can always use things like Google Photos or the cloud, so you don't actually need to store that much on your phone. Now, the last thing to mention in terms of I/O is the speaker. And yes, it's a speaker singular because it's a mono speaker setup, not stereo speakers. Now, normally I would say this is very disappointing because you want to have that stereo effect, but they do actually have Dolby sound, or I think it's called Dolby sound on this phone, which tunes that mono speaker so it actually sounds very good, or pretty good, especially for a budget phone. It's not going to blow you away like some other phone speakers out there, but it's definitely going to be usable. Finally, let's talk about a couple of extras that you do get. So the phone comes with full 5G capability straight out the box. That's because the 5G modem is built into the chipset. I think that's very nice. I'm not sure how useful it is at the moment, to be honest. It's not a lot of places have 5G infrastructure, but it definitely future-proofs you quite nicely, which is nice to see. Then the other feature which you get on the phone is a side-mounted fingerprint sensor. I'm actually a really big fan of these, to be honest, and Apple have even started using them on their iPad minis, so it's definitely the way to go, especially on a budget smartphone. And to be honest, although it's not an under-display fingerprint sensor, it's probably even faster and more reliable anyway, so I'm definitely happy to see it there. Anyway, that's it for this week. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it was kind of informative, at least a little bit. And if it was, then please leave a thumbs up so I know that you liked it, and also it helps with the YouTube algorithm. If you really like the content, you want to see more like this in the future, then definitely smash that subscribe button and hit that notification bell below as well.